Hey, everyone, and welcome back to the show. I'm excited to dive into today's topic because it's something I think many creators have felt at some point, which is that overwhelming sense of being stretched way too thin across platforms. You know the feeling, right? It's you're trying to create for YouTube, you're trying to stay consistent with your podcast. Maybe you're diving into Pinterest or LinkedIn, and by the end of the week, you feel like you've been running on a hamster wheel. You're busy, you may be creating, but you're not really getting anywhere. So today, I want to share something with you that is changing my game. I call it Content Workflow 2.0. And it's all about the question, what if you could create once and amplify it in multiple places? I'm going to walk you through exactly how I built a system that unified my YouTube, podcast, Pinterest, and Substack strategy using something called Gamma as my secret weapon. By the end of this episode, you're going to understand how one piece of content can be 5 different outputs that actually strengthen each other instead of competing for your time and energy. Let's start with the problem, because I'm guessing you've been there. I know I certainly have. Picture this. It's Sunday night, you're starting to work on your content calendar for the week. You need a YouTube video by Wednesday, a podcast episode by Friday, and you promise yourself you'd finally get consistent with Pinterest. So what do? Most of us do what I used to do. We treat each platform like a completely separate beast. We brainstorm a YouTube topic, write that script, generate and edit. Then we brainstorm a totally different podcast topic, outline that episode, and record it. Then we hop over to Pinterest and start from scratch again with pin ideas. Result, you're essentially doing triple the work. And here's the kicker. Your messaging across platforms doesn't even align. Your YouTube audience is hearing one version of your expertise. Your podcast listeners are getting at something totally different. And your Pinterest followers, they're seeing yet another side of you. I read a stat recently that 70% of creators spend more time reformatting content than actually creating it. It means most of us are spending the majority of our creative energy on busy work, not on the thing we're actually good at and want to be doing. I remember this one week back in August where I was trying to keep up with everything. Spent hours writing a YouTube script about a productivity system and spent another 2 hours the next day outlining a completely different podcast episode about content strategy. Then wasted another hour trying to come up with Pinterest pins that had nothing to do with either topic. By Thursday, I was exhausted. My content felt disjointed, and I realized I was working harder, not smarter. That's when I discovered that system that I call now my content command center. Now, if you haven't used Gamma before, I recommend checking it out and think of it as a presentation tool, but way more flexible and intuitive than PowerPoint. And here's how I use it differently. I don't create presentations for other people. I create what I call my content DNA for myself. Every piece of content I create now starts as a highly structured Gamma deck, not a blog post outline, not a video script, but a Gamma deck. And this has changed everything because of 3 key benefits. First, clarity. When I'm building, I'm forced to distill my ideas into their clearest, most essential form. Each slide has to communicate one core concept. There's no room for fluff or filler. So by the time I'm done with my deck, I have a crystal clear messaging. Second, modularity. Each slide becomes a building block. One slide might become a YouTube video section, another might become a podcast talking point, and 3 slides together might become a Pinterest carousel. Everything connects, but everything can also stand alone. Third, resonance. Because I'm starting with such clear, distilled concepts, my content across all platforms has this consistent thread. My audience starts recognizing my voice and my frameworks, whether they found me on YouTube, Pinterest, or anywhere else. Instead of scattered thoughts across different platforms, I now have one source of truth, and that source of truth becomes the foundation for everything I create. Let me break it down exactly how this works across 3 main platforms I'm focusing on. Starting with YouTube, a Gamma deck becomes my video blueprint. Each slide naturally translates into a section of my script. The visual elements I've already created in Gamma can become actual graphics in my video. And because I've already thought through the logical flow in the deck, my video structure practically writes itself. Actually, that's exactly what I'm doing right now with this podcast episode. This entire podcast started as a Gamma deck. I mapped out the key points, the transitions, the examples I wanted to share. Then instead of reading from a rigid script, I'm just having a natural conversation based on the framework I already built. For Pinterest, this is where things get really interesting. Pinterest is having a massive resurgence as a discovery engine, and most creators are completely missing the opportunity. While everyone's chasing the algorithm on Instagram or TikTok, Pinterest content can drive traffic for months or even years after you post it. But here's the key. My Gamma cards become evergreen pins. One slide about productivity systems becomes a pin. Another slide about content workflows becomes a different pin. I'm not starting from scratch with Pinterest ideas. I'm repurposing the clear visual concepts I've already developed. The beautiful thing is that instead of starting from scratch for each platform, everything flows from one master framework. My YouTube viewer might discover my podcast because they recognize the same framework. My podcast listener might start following me on Pinterest because they want the visual version of what they just heard. This creates what I'm calling the flywheel effect. And this is where the magic really happens. Each platform starts reinforcing the others instead of competing with them. Someone discovers me through Pinterest pin about content workflows. They click through to my website. Maybe they subscribe to my email list. Later that week, they're browsing YouTube and see my video about the exact same topic, instant recognition and trust. They watch the YouTube video, enjoy my presentation style, and notice I mention I have a podcast. Now they're subscribed to my podcast too. 3 touch points, all from one original master content deck. And each interaction made them more likely to engage with the next. Here's a concrete example. The deck I created about productivity systems last month has now become a YouTube video and a podcast episode and different Pinterest pins that are still driving traffic to my website every single day. One framework, 5 different outputs, and each one strengthens the others. That's the flywheel effect in action. So let me wrap this up with the key takeaway, because I want you to walk away from this episode with something you can actually implement. Content Workflow 2.0 is about 3 things: clarity, efficiency, and amplification. Clarity comes from starting with distilling your ideas into their most essential form. Efficiency comes from using that foundation across multiple platforms instead of starting from scratch each time. And amplification happens when your consistent messaging across platforms creates that flywheel effect. Now, if this resonates with you and you want to go deeper, the link to this presentation that this podcast is based upon is in the show notes. Thanks very much for listening today. I do hope this gives you a completely new way to think about content creation. Instead of being everywhere at once, you can create once and be everywhere that matters. I look forward to seeing you on the next episode.